You can't park here, right?
Yes.
A young couple ran away with $200 million in cash, only to be shot dead on the street. The killer even fired a few more shots before leaving. From a distance, the curly-haired man was so scared that his calves were trembling. If you want to run away with money from a Philippine gambling den, you first have to see if the bullets agree. And the mastermind behind all this is a gambling tycoon named Hank. This was an operation to clean up internal spies that he personally arranged. Hank owns a gambling den in the Philippines, earning tens of billions of pesos a year. With a very thick family fortune, one day, he took his subordinate Denny to a business meeting. The other party suddenly started reciting poems in the car. Hank frowned as he listened, thinking that ignorance was really annoying. The two argued their way to the gambling den. Hank asked Denny to wait in the car, while he went in with his men. However, the usually bustling restaurant had only a few people today. What was even stranger was that the guiding waiter was staring at him and secretly making a phone call. Hank's heart skipped a beat, and he turned around to run, but unfortunately was directly blocked by the National Bureau of Investigation. Amid the sound of police sirens, Hank was stuffed into a police car by the police. There were many reporters at the court entrance, with camera flashes focusing on him. This murder suspect, who was being pursued transnationally by the South Korean police, was finally going to face trial today. Faced with a series of questions about the details of the murder and transnational escape, Hank just kept his mouth shut and said nothing. The handcuffs on his wrists hurt him badly, which reminded him of even more painful days. When he was a child, his father David was in prison, and the family was very poor, so his mother had to send him to a nursery in order to eat delicious fried chicken. Hank even took his younger brother Jang Sun to rush into a fire ant nest. The poisonous ants stung painfully all over their bodies, but they still caught a full bag and exchanged it with Grandpa Chinese medicine for 201. However, the unscrupulous store raised the price of fried chicken, and this amount of money couldn't even buy chicken bones. Hank had no choice but to play a trick. He won money from the little beggars, but ended up losing all his hard-earned money. This was also Hank's first contact with gambling. The two slipped back to the nursery. In disappointment, at night, they were so hungry that they felt dizzy, grabbed the pig food on the railing and stuffed it into their mouths, but were caught by the nursery teacher. Then the teacher told Hank that his mother Helen was going to take him to live in Seoul. The two children sat on the ridge of the field and thought casually, life in the big city must be good. At least they didn't have to secretly eat pig food to fill their stomachs. Unexpectedly, the dream came true. Helen really came to the nursery to pick him up. After all, it was very rare for a child in this place to be picked up by his family. Hank immediately followed his mother to start a new life. Helen worked as a servant in a wealthy family. Although there was no salary, the leftover food from the family banquets could be brought back, which was better than going hungry in the nursery. Hank was also sensible, often catching tadpoles and selling them to old ladies to feed chickens to earn pocket money. However, just as life was starting to get better, his father David, who was in prison, was released after serving his sentence. David came home and saw that there was no decent meal, so he raised his hand to be rough. Fortunately, Hank found an excuse to persuade him to stop. When David heard that Hank was illiterate, he bought books to teach him to read. Then he gathered his old subordinates and opened a gambling den at home. And the business was booming. Hank was also sent to school, holding textbooks and studying hard. It seemed that life was developing in a good direction. If there are no accidents, an accident is coming. Two of David's underlings were caught cheating in the gambling den. He lost his temper and beat them severely, leaving them seriously injured. As a result, he ended up in prison again. To make a living, Hank had to drop out of school and flee with Helen. The two went to Daejeon to earn a living. The restaurant owner's wife took pity on the mother and son, so she tidied up a side room for them to live in, on the condition that Helen had to help with running errands and odd jobs. Anyway, the mother and son finally had a shelter from the wind and rain. However, one day, while Hank was wandering on the street, he suddenly ran into Jang Sun, his brother from the nursery. This guy was so hungry back then that he ran away from the nursery to make a living. Now he was working as a tool for a newspaper peddler. He sold a newspaper for 71, but the peddler took 50. One is a cut, and if there was one left unsold, he would get a beating with a stick. Hank decided on the spot to join in. Others dared to take at most 5 or 6 newspapers to sell, but he asked for 100 copies, and raised the price to 101. Hank then headed to the cinema, specifically targeting young people and couples. He would first kneel down to shine their shoes, and when he saw that he had made them happy, he would quickly take out the newspapers to sell, while other newspaper boys were screaming in pain because they didn't sell out their newspapers. Hank and Jang Sun had already taken their money bags to settle accounts with the newspaper peddler. This business acumen made them natural money-making geniuses. Later, this guy became even more promising. He even opened an English cram school with top foreign teachers, which instantly became the most popular straight-A student factory in the area. With a very considerable monthly income, Hank thought he had made it. big, but it wasn't until Zhang Sun came to him that he realized he was just a frog in a well. The guy who used to get beaten while selling newspapers with him back then had now become a gambling machine middleman, earning a net profit of 5 billion won a year. The money from the cram school wasn't even enough for a fraction of that. Of course, Zhang Sun didn't come to show off his wealth. It was because some gangsters outside owed him money, and were playing tricks to avoid paying it back, and he couldn't resort to violence. Zhang Sun knew that Hank was best at dealing with such messes, so he specifically invited him to join a project. Hank had been dealing with gambling since he was a child. As soon as he heard Zhang Sun say that opening a gambling den was the real way to get rich, Hank's mind was already on the big money-making plan. Zhang Sun quickly took him straight to the underground casino at the pier. It was outwardly a bar, but actually had hidden secrets. When gamblers won money, they had to take drink coupons to a winery to exchange for cash, which was so troublesome that it could drive impatient people crazy. However, Hank's eyes lit up, and he instantly saw a business opportunity. He decided to partner with Zhang Sun to open a venue, but he insisted on cash settlement. After all, simplicity and straightforwardness are what attract people. Hank directly called his childhood friend who was the police chief. They had grown up together, so handling this situation was a piece of cake. Then Hank took out 30 million won to take over a bar that was about to go out of business as their venue, and Zhang Sun found more than a dozen skilled beautiful croupiers. To save the girls from having to run around too much, Hank built simple dormitories on the top floor. After a simple renovation, the bar and gambling venue opened in a lively manner, with customers flocking here and business booming. Hank even hired a cook so that gamblers could have a hot meal when they took a break. To keep order, he also hired local gangsters as security guards. However, unexpectedly, the police didn't come to cause trouble, but the people from the National Tax Service showed up first. Plainclothes police officers pretended to be gamblers and sneaked into the casino, collaborating with the National Tax Service from the inside, and ransacked the gambling den on the spot. At that time, Hank and Zhang Sun were casually swinging golf clubs on the golf course. When they received the call that the casino had been sealed, they were instantly stunned. Hank quickly told Zhang Sun to take the money and run, leaving all the money in the bank behind. Because saving their lives was the most important thing, he also gave Zhang Sun a secret phone, warning him not to contact anyone during this period, not even his wife. But Zhang Sun couldn't bear to see tens of billions go down the drain. He immediately contacted his wife to sell their property, only to be tracked down by the National Tax Service via his location. At first, this guy was tough-mouthed, insisting he knew nothing, but when the agent said he'd face a 45 billion fine and 5 years in prison, Zhang Sun's legs went weak with fear. In the end, he spilled everything. But just then, Hank suddenly called. The agent grabbed the phone to negotiate with him. Hank quickly turned to his police chief friend for help, but the friend said there was nothing he could do. Once the National Tax Service got involved, he urged Hank to run first, and he'd figure out a way to get him out later. Hank fled all the way to the Philippines, and coincidentally ran into his senior Jack and his buddy Dong Yi there. The three sat chatting, and Hank's thoughts drifted back to his school days. Back then, he was the leader of the sophomore class, and Dong Yi was his follower. But once, during a meal, Jack, a senior in the third year, asked Hank to greet him first. The hot-headed Hank refused, and the two fell out on the spot. Jack brought a few guys over to yell and curse. Hank's short temper couldn't stand that, so the two started fighting immediately, and Hank beat Jack black and blue. Jack's uncle came to settle the score. When Helen found out, she quickly apologized and even made Hank kneel to admit his mistake. They thought the matter was settled, but Jack's uncle wouldn't let it go. He not only beat and kicked Hank, but also threw Helen to the ground. Hank flew into a rage on the spot. Jack quickly told his uncle to stop the farce. After all, he was also at fault. Unexpectedly, his uncle pulled out a knife directly at the critical moment. David, who had just been released from prison after serving his sentence, appeared in time and severely beat up the arrogant guy on the spot. What's even more surprising is that the next day, Jack took the initiative to find Hank and proposed a reconciliation. Men's friendship is so magical. These two, who didn't know each other until they fought, became brothers instead. Right after graduating from high school, Jack took Dong Yi to make a living in the Philippines, and now he's a manager at a local casino. When Jack learned about Hank's current difficulties, he immediately took him and Dong Yi to the casino to relax. Hank was instantly stunned when he saw the luxuriously decorated casino hall, compared to the small venue he ran in South Korea. This was like a small grocery store meeting a big supermarket. What's even more amazing is that the VIP boxes are filled with clients from all over the world, and the deposits they put down are sky high. Jack immediately introduced him to Manager Min, the casino's agent, who was a prominent figure in the local area. With his years of experience, Hank quickly got the hang of it and won a fortune in no time. In a good mood, when he learned that Dong Yi's son needed money to study abroad, he immediately handed over a huge sum. But there's no such thing as only winning and never losing in gambling. Hank's luck suddenly took a turn for the worse. He not only lost all the money he had won but also his principal, and even owed manager Min a debt. At this moment, a local gangster suddenly came to trouble manager Min, and Hank quickly found an excuse to send him away. No one expected that this seemingly ordinary act would set the wheels of fate in motion. In the days that followed, desperate to turn his luck around after losing his mind to gambling, Hank, through Jack, met Jason, a local loan shark gangster. He borrowed a lot of money from Jason but still lost it all. However, Dong Yi, who ran a travel agency, used Hank's money to suddenly transform his life and start driving a luxury car. On the day he was picking up goods from Jason, Dong Yi even said he had found a free cash machine, while Hank, who had helped him before, couldn't even afford a meal. At this moment, the female agent from South Korea's National Tax Service contacted Hank again. She said that as long as he returned to the country and paid the taxes owed, his criminal liability wouldn't be pursued. She even threatened him with Hank's child, but he hung up the phone immediately. After all, Hank had no money at all now. Then he quickly contacted his wife in South Korea, planning to let them come to live in the Philippines, and he intended to sell the house there to use his gambling funds to recoup his losses. However, unexpectedly, an accident happened that night. David suddenly fell ill and was hospitalized, and his wife urgently urged Hank to return home, but he felt uneasy, fearing that the National Tax Service had already targeted his passport, and that he would be arrested as soon as he got off the plane. So he quickly asked his childhood friend, the police chief, for information. However, the friend told him to rest assured and return, because the National Tax Service had not filed a lawsuit. Hank quickly packed his luggage, but Jason showed up with his men in the middle of the night to demand repayment. Hank flew into a rage and instantly pinned Jason against the wall. The thugs around immediately drew their guns at him, but Hank calmly said that he was just going back to attend his father's funeral, and he would repay the debt with principal and interest when he returned. Jason was instantly overwhelmed by his regal aura, and left directly with his men. Before leaving, Hank asked President Min for an extension on the debt, since he had just helped President Min settle a matter a few days ago, and President Min saw that he was both good at fighting and accounting, and was short of staff at that time. President Min immediately took Hank into his group and handed over the VIP room to him. Hank was very grateful, and quickly asked Dong Yi to borrow 300,000 pesos to buy a plane ticket. However, he didn't expect that Dong Yi not only had no money at all, but even spent all the money for his child's study abroad on drugs. It turned out that he had been addicted to drugs in recent years, and had just bought drugs from Jason not long ago. Since being impressed by Hank's aura last time, Jason quickly asked Dong Yi about Hank's identity, and only then learned that Hank had been a soldier, and even been to the battlefield. After Hank learned the true character of Dong Yi, he had to scrape together money to buy a plane ticket back to South Korea. However, as soon as he got off the plane, he learned that David had just passed away. Hank's memory suddenly went back to high school. Back then, although his father stopped gambling after being released from prison, he got addicted to illegal drugs. Life was more bitter than bitter melon, and he muddled along at home every day. On that day, David found out that Helen had secretly bought a house for Hank. His father, overcome by drug addiction, domestically abused his mother. Hank couldn't bear it anymore, pushed his father down, and left home with his mother. Since then, the father and son never saw each other again. He returned to China to handle the funeral out of a trace of kindness. At the funeral, a man claiming to be Hank's half-brother suddenly appeared. Hank politely retorted him, then left immediately. However, at this moment, the female agent from the National Tax Service suddenly found Hank, and demanded that he must pay tens of billions in fines, but Hank knew that the National Tax Service had no relevant evidence to prosecute him, so he directly played a psychological game with the female agent. Hank said that he didn't have that much money, and he might as well go to jail. He even said that he would take his family to settle in the Philippines. After careful consideration, the female agent directly reduced the huge amount of tens of billions to 800 million, and the matter was considered over. This gap was a bit big, and the colleagues around were puzzled. In this case, they should appeal against Hank, and let him go to jail with Zhang Sun. The female agent turned her head and explained that the evidence they had wasn't enough to appeal against Hank, so getting some fine was better than nothing, otherwise they wouldn't even get their salaries. After the matter was resolved, Hank immediately returned to Manila, Philippines. With the emergency money from President Min, he repaid Jason's debt with principal and interest, and even gave extra interest as compensation. Hank, who was short of staff, simply decided to take Jason to work with him, and even planned to give him 5% of the shares. He also advised Jason not to always collect debts violently, but to learn to collect money in a civilized way. Jason was instantly moved to tears by this righteous act. Looking at the big brother in front of him, Jason couldn't hold back anymore. He secretly dropped a bombshell, hoping that Hank would be on guard against Dong Yi. It turned out that the news of Jason going to press for the debt earlier was leaked by Dong Yi behind the scenes. This guy not only played dirty tricks secretly, but also took Hank for a fool. Hank couldn't believe that the brother who had endured hunger with him could be so heartless, he confronted Dong Yi that night. Facts proved that Jason was not lying. The follower who used to be behind him had long become a poisonous snake. Dong Yi thought he had made something of himself, but he was bent on getting the better of Hank. There was no trace of old friendship in Dong Yi's arrogance. Faced with Hank's questioning, the next second, the cowardly Dong Yi still didn't dare to make a move. Hank made it clear directly that from now on, they would go their separate ways, and all past feelings would be written off. With neither owing the other anything, this incident was a real wake-up call for Hank. After all, the world is dangerous, and one shouldn't give one's sincerity casually. Since then, Hank has been wholeheartedly focused on his career. With his extraordinary brains, he helped President Min make a huge profit of 300 million pesos. According to their previous agreement, Hank could have received 50 million, but President Min valued talent so much that he took out his own money and gave an additional 50 million on the spot. Hank was so moved that he couldn't close his mouth, and President Min planned to hand over more business to him, but with one requirement. President Min threw out a stack of documents, all about Korean deadbeats who owed money and refused to pay. Hank took on the task of collecting the money, immediately packed his things and went back to South Korea. Unexpectedly, he ran into a tough nut as soon as he landed. That director was simply shameless, and insisted on fighting to the end. The next second, Hank directly resorted to a big trick. When he encountered a gangster who refused to pay his debts, Hank went to his wife's barbershop to patronize enthusiastically, disrupting the business. This trick really worked, and he helped President Min get back all the debts in a short time. After finishing his business, Hank immediately went home to visit his mother Helen. He was surprised to see that his mother had learned to write. The mother and son sat chatting, and Helen served the soybean paste soup she had made by herself. However, as soon as Hank took a sip, memories flooded out like an open sluice. In his third year of high school, Hank met a good teacher. The teacher saw that he was talented in studying, and was afraid that Hank would go astray. He not only urged him to study every day, but also took out half of his salary to support him. Hank studied hard, and his college entrance examination results were so good that he could choose any university in South Korea. It seemed that he was about to turn his life around. However, the teacher who helped him resigned due to illness, and an old man who loved money took over the job of guiding college applications. When the old man saw that Hank had no money to buy the books he was promoting, he scolded and brainwashed Hank, and tricked him into a third-rate university. After Hank went there, he found that the school was extremely bad, so he simply suspended his studies and left. After leaving the campus, Hank got involved in the student movement. When he saw motorcycle gangs bullying passers-by, he rushed up to rescue the trapped girl. Unexpectedly, he accidentally hurt someone, and was finally arrested by the police and put in prison. It was at that time that his mother went to visit him in prison with soybean paste soup, and this taste has stayed with him for a lifetime. After being released from prison, the group of radical students from back then suddenly came to him. Hank, in a muddle, became the security captain of the student movement. However, criminal police watched him like a thief every day. Hank was afraid that his mother would worry again, and was eager to run away. After thinking about it, he could only join the army, but because he had a criminal record, the regular army didn't even look at him. At a critical moment, Hank ran into Minister Kim, who was recruiting intelligence soldiers. Minister Kim didn't care about his dark past, and directly recruited him into his team. After rounds of devilish training, Hank successfully made the cut with his inherent toughness and cleverness. He was assigned to the North Intelligence Team, which specialized in gathering intelligence in North Korea, and the danger was simply off the charts. During the years Hank carried out missions in the army, he developed great courage and real skills. It was precisely these abilities honed through life-threatening efforts that made Chairman Min praise Hank as a reliable guy to everyone he met. Since he helped Chairman Min recover all the debts, Chairman Min directly handed over the management right of the VIP box to him. With Chairman Min's support, Hank gradually established a firm foothold in the Philippines. He also kept his word and directly assigned Jason to his subordinate Ian. However, on this day, Shangja, Hank's subordinate in South Korea, suddenly called, saying that his friend Mike had gone to the Philippines, and wanted Hank to take care of him. Hank, who had always been loyal, readily agreed. Little did he know that Mike had just met Chairman Min. It turned out that Mike's father was a building materials tycoon. Mike's adult entertainment venue in South Korea was shut down, and he became a wanted criminal, so he fled to the Philippines to lie low, and Chairman Min directly took him in. When Mike heard Hank calling his name, he initially came to the door with an arrogant attitude. However, upon learning that Hank was the big brother mentioned by Shangja, he immediately restrained his arrogance, and said he would come to visit the next day. Hank thought Mike didn't look like a good person, and intended to give him $10,000 to send him away. Unexpectedly, Mike wanted to get involved in the casino business, which made Hank angry and he scolded him on the spot. At this moment, Chairman Min returned to the office in an embarrassed state. Hank learned from Ian that the local gang leader Sangu had come to force Chairman Min to lend him money again, and even used violence to make him kneel. Hank was instantly enraged. His boss was being bullied, which was simply ignoring him. He immediately rushed to Denny's hotel, only to find Jack there. It turned out that Jack was Denny's subordinate. Hank warned Denny not to target Chairman Min again. Jack quickly advised Hank to leave, but Denny deliberately made things difficult, telling Hank to drink a whole bottle of high-proof vodka, and then the matter would be over. Hank, a man of few words but decisive actions, picked up the bottle and drank it all in one go. Before leaving, he also warned Denny's subordinates, who were instantly impressed by his courage, and looked at him differently on the spot. He helped Chairman Min out of trouble with his own ability, and Chairman Min trusted him more and more. In the next few years, Hank actually made a steady profit of 70 billion won easily, through gambling rebate operations, exchanging part of the chips for cash and part for high-end restaurant vouchers. Even the female employees ate big meals every day. He even had police escorts when he went out, living a very glamorous life. But having money wasn't enough, he also needed power. Hank immediately started figuring out how to build connections in the political world. After accidentally meeting the president's secretary by chance, Hank gave political funds to the mayor every year. Seeing that there were many vouchers left, he suddenly came up with a perfect solution, asking the secretary to bring politicians to the restaurant for seminars every Monday. He treated the politicians to free big meals, and Hank took the opportunity to get to know more political figures. This trick really worked, and the seminars grew bigger and bigger, with even the president's son coming to attend. However, on this day, the secretary introduced Hank to an important figure, Daniel, who was also known as the god of gambling in the Philippines. He had a presence in every casino in the country, and could even influence the choice of president. Hank unapologetically showed his ambition, and with Daniel's support, his career instantly rose to a new level. On this day, Hank took Ian to inspect a struggling casino, where Ian met the love of his life, Moonshin, a hostess. Hank quickly reminded him to focus on his career first, instead of being preoccupied with romance. The two immediately found the owner to demand repayment, but he pleaded poverty, claiming he had no money. Hank didn't press him, just gave him a 1-month deadline. If he didn't pay by then, Hank would take over the establishment. At this moment, Philip, one of the owner's men, suddenly stepped forward to ingratiate himself. Seeing that he knew their friends, Ian greeted him warmly. No one expected that this unassuming minor character would cause a series of troubles in the future. When Hank returned to the office to report to Chairman Min, Mike suddenly flew into a rage. It turned out that he had already been promised to handle the mess of this casino, and he accused Hank of deliberately stealing his job. Slamming the door and leaving on the spot, his hot temper made it clear he was no good. Ian, who had long disliked him, quickly reported to Chairman Min that Mike often beat his subordinates, and had even caused a death. But Chairman Min passed the buck to Hank, telling him to handle it as he saw fit. That night, Hank was dining with the police chief, who introduced him to Jo Yoon-hee from the South Korean embassy. Hank's heart skipped a beat. After all, the South Korean police were looking for him everywhere. Sure enough, Jo Yoon-hee found him familiar, and directly took out a wanted notice from South Korea, on which was clearly a photo of Hank. He quickly made his escape, but Jo Yoon-hee got his number from the chief, and called to question him. Hank had to mumble his way through the conversation. It turned out that when he helped Chairman Min collect a debt years ago, he had beaten a gang leader, who then reported him for violent extortion. To make matters worse, there was a sudden shakeup in Philippine politics. All the politicians Hank had funded were replaced, and the weekly political seminars were cancelled. Without political backing, Chairman Min's casino immediately ran into trouble. Fortunately, he found a new backer, the son of the owner of a South Korean construction company at Calais Hotel. The chairman immediately decided to transfer all operations from Manila to Calais, even absorbing Denny's company, and Philip became one of Hank's men. On this day, Ian suddenly dragged Hank to a restaurant, and secretly pulled Eun-shin over to introduce her. It turned out that they had already confessed their feelings, and Ian had successfully won the girl's heart. But just then, Chairman Min called, ordering Hank to hurry up and bid for Calais Hotel. The two immediately got into an argument. Before Chairman Min could calm down, the local chairman Gu suddenly showed up at the casino, specifically telling Hank to hurry up and complete the project. Meanwhile, Ian took the opportunity to ask for a job for Eun-shin. Hank couldn't resist his subordinate's plea and agreed, so Eun-shin successfully became an employee of the casino. When Hank was inspecting with Philip, Eun-shin flirted with Philip. With no regard for Ian, this love triangle was a ticking time bomb. Despite the undercurrents here, Hank's business in Calais was booming. When he first arrived, he wanted to secure the casino project at the new hotel, but the manager hesitated, saying that a company had already invested money a year earlier. Hank immediately put his arm around the manager, politely urging him, saying that if he didn't resolve it properly, he would send him to his grave. Jason and Ian directly pulled out 100 million pesos, and the group left, leaving the manager sweating on the spot. Before long, Ian suddenly reported to Hank that Little B Professor Luo had brought in a big client. Little B here refers to those who lose all their money in the casino, refuse to leave, and earn commissions by luring new customers. This time, Professor Luo brought Chairman Zhang, who runs a large enterprise in South Korea, and is said to be worth 40 billion won, a real fat sheep waiting to be slaughtered. Meeting a fellow townsman in a foreign country, the three called each other brothers warmly. After a few rounds of drinking, taking the opportunity of toasting, Hank suddenly offered to upgrade Chairman Zhang's hotel and air ticket, and took his passport to check. After confirming that he was a fat sheep with nothing but meat, his mind started working rapidly. After all, if you want to catch a big fish, you have to cast the line first. Hank first stayed up all night chatting with Chairman Zhang to get close to him, then accompanied him to play golf to cater to his hobbies, and finally led him into the casino logically. As soon as Professor Luo finished his work, Philip directly and readily paid him. At this time, Chairman Zhang got hooked as soon as he sat down at the table. Before long, he lost all his cash. He then asked Philip for 500,000 won with red eyes, but lost it all again in a short while. Chairman Zhang wanted to borrow more, and Hank quickly pretended to persuade him not to get addicted. However, the other party was obsessed and insisted on playing another round. Hank quickly resorted to a big trick. He directly took 10 million pesos from his own account, and colluded with the dealer to let Chairman Zhang win several rounds in a row. This made the other party addicted, and he directly took his capital. To play big, winning another 10 million in a blink of an eye, Hank again hypocritically advised him to quit while he was ahead, and helped him launder the money and remit it back to his country. Chairman Zhang let down his guard, and truly regarded him as a reliable brother from the bottom of his heart. However, just a few days after returning to China, Chairman Zhang went to the Philippines again. Under the pretext of a business trip, Hank entertained him with the highest standard of good wine and good food, and this time he won another 100 million pesos. Looking at the back of Chairman Zhang returning home happily, Hank knew very well that this was a carefully dug pit for him, and sooner or later, Chairman Zhang would have to spit out all the money with interest. At the same time, Philip was smoking outside, and Unshin immediately went up to talk to him. Seeing the tattoo on Philip's chest, she quickly pretended to be curious, and reached out to touch it, making Philip blush and his heart beat faster. Philip tentatively asked about Unshin's relationship with Ian, but she said they were just ordinary friends. Philip was instantly overjoyed, and asked her out for dinner another day. Unshin's intention wasn't about the meal at all. The next day, a big shot suddenly came to the casino. Chairman Gu, who was worth several trillion won, she had talked to Chairman Min before. This self-made female tycoon had a strong aura, and her ruthlessness and indifference shocked the whole audience at a glance. Unshin's eyes widened immediately, and she quickly asked Ian about her background, then turned around to fawn on her, but Chairman Gu saw through her intention at a glance, and ignored her at all. At the critical moment, Philip suddenly appeared. It turned out that he was familiar with the female chairman, and easily pulled Unshin to the dinner table. During the meal, Chairman Gu even joked about matching them up, which was exactly what Unshin wanted. She was already ambitious and greedy for glory and wealth. Seeing that Philip was more capable than Ian, she immediately made up her mind to switch to a better target. That night, Unshin and Philip got intimate in bed. Eager to curry favor with Chairman Gu, she pestered Philip to find out about Chairman Gu's preferences, even hanging up Ian's calls directly. Little did she know that Ian, who was downstairs at this moment, saw everything clearly. The next day, a local gangster named Carl suddenly came to see Hank, and whispered that two investors from South Korea wanted to inspect the casino project. Carl wanted to team up with Hank to cheat them out of money. Ian quickly told Hank not to believe it, explaining that these two investors were fraudsters, who had embezzled 50 billion won from angel financing in South Korea and fled. However, Hank said he already knew this. After all, it was he who had set a trap for them. A few days later, the two investors suddenly arrived in the Philippines. Carl arranged royal treatment for them, and extended Lincoln leading the way with police escort, making a grand show. At the dinner that night, after some eating, the investors suddenly changed the subject, and asked Hank about the casino's profits. He was stunned on the spot, and dragged Carl outside to question him. Only then did Carl stammer, and confess that he had pocketed the investors' money, and used Hank's name as a guarantee. Furious, Hank almost kicked him, then told him to quickly transfer the money to the casino account, to be managed by Hank. The two investors realized they had been scammed when they returned home, and realized something was wrong. They contacted Carl overnight to withdraw their investment, but but Carl flew into a rage upon hearing this, and even went to their place to issue threats. He thought the two, being wanted criminals in South Korea, wouldn't dare cause trouble in the Philippines, warning them to stay put and not court death, otherwise they would end up dead on the street. Meanwhile, criminal cases had been piling up in Calais recently, especially cases involving South Koreans. South Korea quickly sent police officer Jun to the Philippines to assist the local police in the investigation. Although Jun had no practical experience, he had won the Excellent Police Award twice. Upon arriving at the Calais police station, Jun was shocked by the extremely poor working conditions. A veteran police officer specifically warned Jun to be careful here. After all, almost everyone in the Philippines had a gun, and his life was at stake. But Jun had two tasks on his mind: overtly investigating the murder case, and covertly obtaining evidence of Chairman Gu's gambling activities in the Philippines. The Philippine police advised him, saying Hank had connections as solid as a building, and telling Jun not to mess with him. But Jun didn't care. He marched into the casino confidently, only to be received by Unshin. It turned out that not long ago, Unshin had used her charms to get Ian to help her become a broker. At this moment, Jun suddenly caught sight of the female chairman playing cards. He politely excused himself to go to the bathroom, and upon returning, immediately took out his phone to secretly record a video. The female chairman was playing particularly wildly that day, betting 200 million pesos, and even using the color of a girl's underwear as a bet. And she actually won. This single hand earned her hundreds of millions. The female chairman told Unshin to convert the money into one and remit it back. Jun slipped back to his rental house with the video, and immediately sent the evidence back to his country. While this side was laughing from winning so much money, Chairman Zhang at the next table was losing badly. Not only did he lose all the money he had won before, but he also lost the billions of principal he had brought with him. He was so angry that he almost fainted at the gambling table on the spot. At the same time, Hank's friend John suddenly arrived in Calais, saying he needed to do something for his boss. Knowing that Hank was well connected in the local casinos, he asked Hank to help him get into a casino to kill someone. Hank led him in directly. Before long, the target appeared at the card table. John gave Hank a look, and Hank immediately understood, politely leaving the table. It was clear they were going to do something not meant for others' eyes. As soon as Hank walked away, John suddenly followed the target into the bathroom. Before the target could react, he took out a gun and cleanly took care of him, along with the bodyguard. After confirming the target was dead, John quickly took photos of the scene and sent them to his boss to report. It turned out this poor guy had secretly traded shares behind his boss's back, which led to his murder. Meanwhile, Carl's negotiations with the two investors completely broke down. Frustrated, he directly decided to kill them to cover his tracks. Carl dragged the bodies to a desolate countryside and threw the murder weapon over the bridge. Afterwards, terrified out of his wits, he went to Hank for help overnight. Upon hearing this, Hank wanted to cover for him. After all, as long as the Philippine police didn't file a case, South Korea couldn't pursue liability. Hank asked Ian to find an untraceable invisible car to arrange for Carl to flee and lie low. Unexpectedly, when Carl saw the black-clothed man in the car, he instantly imagined a scene of being silenced, waved his hands frantically saying he hadn't killed anyone, ignored Hank's persuasion, stepped on the gas, and fled. Sure enough, a few days later, the bodies of the two investors were found by the police. Jun rushed to the scene after receiving the report, but Hank, who had heard the news, arrived first with Ian. After identifying themselves to the police, Hank entered the scene and almost laughed in anger. Carl had chosen a farmland to dump the bodies. A regular shovel broke after digging a shallow pit. Presumably, he couldn't dig further, so he just left the bodies there and left. To make matters worse, since Carl hadn't transferred the investment money into the casino account, Hank hurried to his house to find the money, but it was already empty. Ian suddenly found bloodstains in Carl's car. Checking the car's surveillance, they saw Carl disposing of the murder weapon clearly captured on camera. The two quickly destroyed the evidence. After all, if the police caught Carl, everyone would end up in jail. At this moment, Jason called suddenly, saying he found only 30 million pesos left in Carl's account. The 200 million pesos had vanished. Hank was so angry he almost crushed his phone, quickly telling Jason to freeze the account. While he went to check the investors' hotel, the place was in chaos, and Hank only found a few remittance slips. Just then, Philip called. Unshin had run off with the money, while exchanging funds for the female chairman. Hank rushed back immediately, facing the female chairman's rage. Hank claimed Unshin was just a hotel manager, with no ties to anyone, emphasizing the casino was also a victim. He distanced himself from the matter completely, making the female chairman so angry she nearly flipped the table, but could only hurl a harsh threat. Hank quickly had Unshin's background checked, only to find she was a veteran scammer. Originally a Korean hostess, she'd once stolen 700 million won from a client, served 6 months in prison, and came to the Philippines to resume her old tricks. From Ian onward, deceit had been her modus operandi. The two men bowed their heads, guilty. Hank rushed to Unshin's house with Ian and Philip, only to find it empty. Hank questioned Ian, who swore he hadn't betrayed them, in the corner. Philip fidgeted nervously, spotting his lighter on the nightstand, and hurriedly hiding it in a lamp. But Hank noticed the small act, instantly realizing everything. Meanwhile, since the victims were Korean, the case naturally fell to June. A Philippine policeman gave him an unorthodox tip. Korean victims here were likely killed by their own compatriots, advising him to check Koreatown. June contacted an informant and found a key lead. The two investors had been brought by Carl. Following the lead to a barbecue restaurant, he ran into Carl, questioned. Carl was as unyielding as tough jerky, claiming he'd dropped them at their hotel, and never seen them again, even threatening June. On the other hand, since the fraud money embezzled by the investors hadn't been recovered, South Korean police sent two elites to the Philippines for assistance. The three first went to the mortuary to identify the bodies. On the way, June heard crucial news. Hank had visited the crime scene and might know something. He rushed to ask Hank, but the new Korean policeman suddenly acted high and mighty, bossing Hank around. Hank's face darkened, saying he wouldn't cooperate even if he had evidence. Luckily, June smoothed things over, and Hank, coming down, produced surveillance footage from Carl's house. Police followed the video to a warehouse, found the murder weapon, and issued a warrant for Carl on the spot. Ian was confused. After all, Hank had protected Carl before, but Hank explained Carl had broken his word and run off with the money if he'd handed over the cash. Hank could have covered up the case perfectly. It was all Carl's own fault. Meanwhile, Unshin was hiding in a hotel, calling her seriously ill mother, saying she'd bring money home for treatment in a few days. She then took 200 million pesos to find a money changer, but Philippine money changers were already Hank's informants, and her location was instantly tracked. Hank was searching Philip's house, finding Unshin's passport and affectionate photos of the two. He called Philip, telling him to bring Unshin back from the money changer, adding he hoped Philip would take care. Philip went out to find his car missing, but Jason happened to return and gave him a ride. Getting out and seeing Unshin, Philip grabbed her. Unshin still talked of running off with the money together. They'd been partners in the heist, planning to elope, but greed made her ditch him to run off alone. Unable to reach her, Philip called Hank to rat her out, hoping to clear himself. Now Unshin was trapped, and Philip urged her to apologize and beg for mercy. While the two were arguing fiercely, a killer disguised as a policeman suddenly appeared and shot them dead. He then took the money and left casually, scaring Jason out of his wits. Upon hearing the news of their deaths, Ian was instantly heartbroken. Hank, however, acted innocent and shifted the blame to the police. The killer was none other than John, a professional casino hitman. When Hank offered payment, John waved his hand and took out a pile of documents from the trunk, which showed a Hong Kong bank corporate account. It turned out that John's boss was dead, and he couldn't withdraw the money, so he had to ask Hank for help. After they parted, Hank hid the money directly in a secret base. The case of Unshin's shooting also fell to June. He was very annoyed to see that the deceased was from Hank's casino. After all, Carl was still at large, and a new murder case had come up, keeping him so busy that he didn't even have time to catch his breath. That night, June was working out at Homeland. Someone knocked on the door. However, when he opened the door, there was no one in sight. There was a note lying on the ground, with Carl's hiding place written on it. It turned out to be a kind tip from Hank, who found out through Carl's girlfriend's social media that the two were hiding in the Paradise Resort Hotel. June quickly informed the Philippine police of the information, but they dragged their feet and led a team to the place, only to find that Carl had checked out and escaped the previous day. What was even more annoying was that the Philippine police didn't care about the case involving Koreans at all, and were perfunctory throughout. The investigation was entirely relying on June alone. At the same time, Hank encountered another Korean who owed money and refused to pay, so he immediately sent his brothers to deal with it. They cajoled and intimidated the man into calling around to borrow money. The whole process was like a debt-collecting comedy, and finally, the money was raised. When Hank saw that the money had arrived, he didn't care much, and waved his hand to let the man go. He thought the matter was over, but little did he know that this was just the beginning of trouble. The way the men pressed for money made the man's father jump with anxiety. The old man directly called the police for help. The South Korean government quickly contacted Jo Eun-hee in the Philippines, who directly identified the mastermind Hank, and contacted the local police station to apply for assistance in the arrest. It turned out that she was also on good terms with Mike. That day, Mike checked into Cali's with a hotel project, not taking Hank seriously at all. Hank had long held a grudge against him, but he couldn't do anything, because Chairman Min was protecting Mike. After all, this guy had a unique way of getting through to the government, and even Jo Yoon-hee from the South Korean embassy was close to him. Hank could only temporarily suppress his anger. But Ian couldn't swallow this anger. In a conflict, he didn't fight back, and was beaten black and blue by Mike, looking like a panda. When Hank heard about it, he flew into a rage and immediately asked Mike to come to his office for tea. Mike, relying on the face given by Chairman Min, swore and acted aggressively. Jason was so angry that he pressed Mike against the table like a human neural. Hank said that Mike should weigh his own capabilities before acting wildly. He said that he could be replaced at any time. After all, Hank was the loyal follower who had worked hard with Chairman Min from scratch. These words left Mike speechless, his face turning as red as a cooked shrimp. Hank finally dropped a harsh threat. If Mike dared to be arrogant and cause trouble again, he would make Mike disappear in the Philippines. On the other side, June received another tip and finally arrested Carl. This transnational manhunt had finally caught a big fish. But thinking about the tough folk customs in the Philippines where everyone had a gun, June asked his underground connections to buy a black market gun for self-defense that night. At the same time, before the news of Carl's arrest could settle, undercurrents were already surging elsewhere. Hank was like a protagonist in an underdog counterattack story. As a child, he dared to rush into a fire ant nest to get fried chicken. When he grew up, he could stand up to gang bosses to collect gambling debts. He spent his whole life making money on the edge of danger, like a venomous snake that maneuvered skillfully in the Philippines, knowing how to lie low and even better at delivering a fatal strike. His cruelest skill was using friendship and loyalty as chips to pave his way with ruthlessness. In the end, Hank was just a poor wretch forced by life to become a ruthless man, and also a warning. After all, those who get rich through gambling often end up losing to their own greed. When you come out to mingle, even if you win money, you might lose your life. And in the end, who is the mysterious person pointing a gun at Hank? Let's stay tuned for the next episode of King of the Gamble with Life to find out.